Welcome back, everybody, to the first official GYLP Momentum session of 2016. We have today a really special guest. We've got Alec Sheen from Because I Said I Would. Here's the reason why we have him. I'm not sure if this is backwards or upside down for you guys. It says, I will continue to run the GYLP Momentum sessions because I said I would. I made this card back in the summer. Here we are. Now, quick introduction to Alex. I know most of you guys have already seen him. Some of Big Blue, some of the coaches were in a meeting. And for those of you who haven't seen him, our guest speaker has been sharing the importance of a promise with people around the world. Alec Sheen is the founder of Because I Said I Would, a social movement and nonprofit dedicated to the betterment of humanity through promises made and kept. He is someone who truly honors commitment. Alex once walked over 240 miles across the entire state of Ohio in 10 days to fulfill a promise. Alex has impacted millions of people with the Because I Said I Would message through the viral nature of social media. His work has been featured on ABC World News with Diane Sawyer, CNN, the Los Angeles Times, The Today Show, and many other programs. Please help me welcome Alex Sheen. Thank you, Alex, for being here. It's all you.
Thank you for having me. Hi, guys. It's nice to be able to talk to you again. It's a great opportunity to take a message that really was designed to drive an understanding of why it's important to keep your promises. You know, that was really the focus of my time with you previously. But I think in some ways, more importantly, we need to focus on how we keep our promises. Once we have that drive and motivation to do what is right, how do we actually execute? And so I'm going to talk about some things in today's session that focus on how I went through my own journey. Because the truth is, as you may know, with my father passing away, the truth is that I was not a man of my word prior to my father dying. And it shames me to know that he will never know the man that I have become since he left. But in order to become a person of your word, you have to go on a journey. And that's what I did as the founder of Because I Said I Would. In a certain way, I have a target on my back, right? People are waiting for me to break a promise. People expect me in a certain way to be perfect with every word I say, every promise that I make, and that is quite challenging, given the fact that I wasn't necessarily born very good with my promises, or however you might think about that prior to all this starting. So what I'm going to share with you today is I guess some perspectives on how I became who I am. In that, I'll talk about different research and different perspectives and philosophies on the importance of a promise. But I think the first thing I want to start with is this just general concept and thought to share with you about why I believe people are not good with their promises. Now, that might sound obvious to you, but let's take some cultural icons, at least here in the United States, that I think you'll understand that kind of quantify the challenge. Let's look at different types of promises, types of commitments, right? The New Year's resolution, that's a huge one this time of year. Everyone makes this commitment, and really, regardless of what kind of calendar you're on, across the world and across cultures, this time of year is almost the most popular time to make these very big and sometimes outlandish commitments. As the calendar flips, we have this tremendous feeling of change, and that change comes with hope. But the truth is that if you were to study this phenomena, and you were to look even just in the United States at the number of people who actually fulfill their New Year's resolution, when 40% of Americans actually make this commitment, of that group of people who do it, only 8% of people actually fulfill their New Year's resolution. And this is according to the Journal of Clinical Psychology, University of Scranton. You know, I looked at the study, and it wasn't executed perfectly. Certainly in academic rigor, when we look at things, we want to take that extra step. But I assure you that this is indicative. I think that if you were to look around to the people in your own life, people who make these big goals, 8%, 12, 20 would sound about right. And so this is one example of a cultural icon, what I would call it, where we don't keep our promises well. Let's look at a different place in life. Let's look at a big commitment, an emotional commitment, a lifelong, sincerely and literal commitment, and that is marriage, right? In marriage, and this is not to be critical, this is just simply a fact. In the United States, 40% of marriages end in divorce, and depending on the culture and where you come from, vows at marriage can be sort of standard. They can be custom written by the couple. And when you hear these commitments, it is a very long-term, many times forever promise. But a lot of them don't work out. Again, that's not to be judgmental. It's just a simple fact to illustrate that promises are hard to keep. And the third place, I would say is an example of where we're not good at keeping promises is in politics, right? A lot of people actually laugh when I talk about just those two words together, promise and politics. It's almost this immediate chuckle when I'm not even trying to be funny, because they get it, right? They understand that politicians are in the business of over-promising and under-delivering, almost like a certain type of salesman would be. So let's look at this as an area. In the United States, and I'm sure you can echo this thought throughout the world, there are different types of organizations that track the authenticity, the honesty of politicians. And there's one organization here in the United States called politifact.org. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning website for excellence in journalism that tracks how good politicians are at keeping their promises. And when we look at the Republican Party, one of the main parties here in the States, they only fulfill 38% of their commitments. And I'm not trying to give an out to Obama, because he's only at 42% when I looked at the study last. So it's just to show that, generally speaking, it would be hard to do a comprehensive study on how good an American, someone from England or Australia is at keeping promises, but we can look at these cultural icons and identify that there is a core challenge in society today with follow through. Now, this might seem like almost a soft issue, right? It certainly at its surface doesn't seem as important as cancer research or fighting homelessness and trying to get people in a better place in life. But if you look at the importance of a promise, you spend enough time volunteering at different organizations, as I have, looking at humanitarian causes, at the root cause of these issues, you will find broken promises everywhere, whether it is homelessness, whether it is funding cancer research, helping the environment, every issue, you will see not a soft connection, but a distinct understanding that the importance of a promise and committed individuals are needed to better this world. So those are just some examples, but it's not really interesting to talk too much about the fact that people are bad with their promises. I mean, this is sort of obvious. I know you guys, some of you are younger, you already know this. It is not interesting that it is true. It is interesting why it's true. And I think we need to dive into that in order to get better with our promises. And I think this question, why, starts with a very simple statistic. When we look at the importance of a promise across the world, I have tried to sincerely research these issues and tangential things that touch the importance of a promise and impact it. And one statistic that I keep coming back to is this one. 15,942 words a day. 15,942 words a day. This is a study done in Florida in a university here in the States. And yes, it was done on college students, and the number of students were the actual sample population they did it on wasn't massive, but you get the idea. You know, you'll hear me throughout this entire speech be skeptical of market research. That's actually where my background came from, and so I want to take everything with a grain of salt, but let's do that with this number. College students, both male and female, this is an average, and their numbers were only about 500 words a day apart, so statistically almost irrelevant. You could say that people in college talk more. You could say you could say Americans talk more. Maybe that's even true. But let's say it was 5,000. Let's say it was 10,000. This is a lot of words. And imagine in your mind's eye a pie chart of the types of phrases, the words that we say each and every day. A lot of them are promises. And even if it is only 10%, 5%, whatever that number plays out in your mind, think about how many times you say, oh yeah, I'll do that. Oh yeah, of course. Oh, tomorrow. Oh, I'm never going to do that. Or always, I'm going to. When we look at the actual definition, the Merriam-Webster definition of a promise, it doesn't mean you have to use that word promise. A lot of people think about commitment in this way. Oh, I have to say promise. No. Merriam-Webster dictionary defines a promise as a statement telling someone that you will definitely do something, or something will certainly happen in the future. My very commitment to be on this call, to do the AV check before this call, those are all promises. The fact that I said I'm going to call somebody back, or I'm going to follow up with an email, or I'm going to volunteer. They may not seem this way, but to you, to someone who's making the promise, because it might be small to you, but to that other person, when you say I'll be there, I assure you they interpret it as a promise, as they should. So in your mind's eye, again, think of that pie chart of all the things you say. A lot of it is not promises. In fact, maybe it's 95% of the things you say aren't promises, or 99%. With a number as high as 15,942, we are still talking about a ton of commitments. Even a confirmation of yes, when someone says, will you do this, to me is a promise. So it is extremely challenging for us to keep all these promises, and we need to be careful with our word choice. And when we think about our word choice, when we think about all the things that come with a number so high, well, I think there's an inherent challenge when it comes to our memory. You simply, I don't believe, can remember all the things you say, right? We can't remember it with the pinpoint accuracy that a promise deserves. And I've done some research, certainly not an expert, but trying to understand just the core and fundamental challenges of human memory itself. As someone who truly tries to keep every promise that I make. Now, I'm not saying I'm an infallible human being. I have made my mistakes and broken many promises on accident. When I see that and look at the promises I do break, it very often is because I simply forgot. It was something small I said I would do, and then just literally the thought escaped me. And so as I studied memory, I looked to a number of different places where I could, again, understand this lens of research, help me understand memory and how good or bad is it. And so I want to talk about one such study. Now, when we look at the scope and field of memory, there are all types of memory. There's operational memories, there's episodic memory, there's a lot of different things, but I'm going to talk about something that people call, in this field of study, clinical psychologists call, they call it flashbulb memories, right? Flashbulb memory. So what's a flashbulb memory? A flashbulb memory is a memory that you have in your mind, even at this moment, that is quite emotional. It's an event that happened all of a sudden. It's an event that even may be shared by the world. So I'm going to give you an example of a flashbulb memory and talk about a study that was done with it. So in the 80s, the United States sent a crucial mission to space called the Challenger mission. And this space shuttle mission was watched by Americans and people around the world. I remember even watching subsequent NASA missions in the States when I was a kid. And it was just something that you did in class, right? And back in the 80s, even before I did that, it was bigger and bigger as time goes by because of the significance of these missions. Unfortunately, as you may know, the Challenger mission exploded 74 seconds after takeoff. And just like I did when I was a kid, kids before me sat in a classroom and watched this tragedy unfold live. 6 crew members and a high school teacher died instantaneously, and their sacrifices were mourned. Now, this is an example of a flashbulb memory. Across the country, people who are alive at this time can tell you where they were, what they were doing, who they were with, some basic details. They feel it very deeply. Well, you may have this type of memory in your own mind. Respective events in your own country. Here in the United States, 9/11 is that for my generation. And for younger generations, it could be the Boston Marathon bombing. It could be a lot of different things. They are often tragic moments. But let's look at this. Let's look at these memories and how accurate they truly are. Some clinical psychologists were interested in this flashbulb memory process, and so immediately after the Challenger mission exploded, the very day after, they started conducting a study. They asked a number of college-age students where they were, what they were doing, how they found out about this explosion. They asked them 7 questions, basic details of where they were. We're not talking about tremendous things like the time, things like who they were with or where they were. 7 questions. Then, 2 years later, they brought these students back together. Now, in the course of a flashbulb memory and the course of our lives, 2 years is not much. I mean, you should be able to remember things from flashbulb memories from your sixth grade birthday, right? And things that happened even younger. You know, those memories seem distinct, and so should this one. 2 years, not much. When they asked these 7 questions again in basic detail, only 25% or 25% of the people couldn't answer a single question correctly, not one question. And the people who could answer just 2 of 7 questions correctly was only 50%. The truth is that the way our memory works is that we have these little spots of memory that are accurate. And then in between those spots, our mind cannot accept the fact that the memory doesn't all fit together. So what we do is we stitch those things together. And in our mind, sometimes we literally, and not consciously, but we will make things up to fill in the gaps, to make it make sense. And in that becomes the fallacy of accurate memory. We have a very fallible memory in its accuracy. So you may think, okay, well, this is one study. I'm skeptical like Alex is. One study, one event, who knows? College, I don't know. Doesn't seem right. Well, they've repeated this over and over again with 9/11, with other flashbulb memory events. And you could say that all of those are inaccurate too. But for my friends here in the States, and I'll ask this question to people around the world in a different way, for the people in the States, can you tell me what a nickel looks like? A 5-cent piece? Which way is the face pointing? The date that it was minted, that coin, is it on the left side, the right side? What's on the back? A building? How many windows does it have? That's too hard, of course. But is there even a building on the back? Across the world, think about your currency, coins and paper money. Think about the same questions. You see, you have seen this time and time again. But the truth is, if you ask this question to a lot of people, they cannot accurately tell you something they've seen literally hundreds, if not thousands of times. And that's because our memory isn't that good. It's sometimes general, sometimes it can be alarmingly specific and alarmingly accurate. But the reason I bring this up, the reason why I bring this up is in all the words that you say, 5 to 15,000 in a day, you cannot remember them all. And the things that you believe you said may have never been said. The things that you heard someone else say may not be completely accurate. And that is why I created the promise card itself. This thought of creating an artifact to our promises so that that debate was no longer relevant. What was promised is known. And I think this is an incredibly important thing to do and something to be humble about, to realize that you can't remember it all, that it is important to document your commitments when they are important, which is often. So let's say we were some sort of robot, literally a computer that could memorize every single thing to a hard drive that we have ever said or any promise that has ever been made to us. There is still a challenge in keeping promises. There is still a challenge in how we perceive commitment, and that is word choice. You see, even if you could remember everything, you have to think about the words you say in the first place. You know, I know the nature of the group I'm talking about right now. They swing hard. They go for big goals, big things in this life, as I believe many of us should, and I'm attempting myself. However, and when we think about our promises, it is not the same as a goal. A goal is a far off thing, something that we strive for, we push for, but a promise is something very different, where word choice needs to be extremely accurate, and I'll kind of explain an example. You know, I think some of our word choice and the outlandish things that we hope for and the words that we choose to say, I think some of that comes from movies, right? We emulate the greatness in culture. We emulate these moments that we want to see in our own lives. And when we look at movies, when we look at superheroes even, they say, man, the biggest and the greatest things because they have this movie-like moment. They want to create this thing where it's, I'm going to be there for you always. And when Iron Man says he's going to save you, it's hell or high water. There is no excuse. It's not that he forgot he had a doctor's appointment and maybe he'll be, no, it's one or nothing, right? So we get a lot of our word choice from movies, that it's got to be this thing. But the truth is, you know, it's like the simple thought that life is not a movie, right? It's not a movie. And we can't always make these outlandish goals and these outlandish things. We got to think more realistically about what honor is in this life and what being a person of your word is when we think about our word choice and how we craft our promises. So let me give you an example. As you know, I give speeches all the time, you know, and I'm not going to go into that too much, but I'm just talking about this small speech that I had. And if you hear my roommates or my dog in the background, know that I'm giving this speech at home. So when we look at some of these small speeches, I give one at a college here, a small one in the United States, just down the road, about 40 minutes. And I give the speech, one that you heard in many ways. After the speech, there's a meet and greet, shake hands, kiss babies, the whole thing. I believe she was a sophomore, came up to me in the hallway, almost ran, and came and said, I know exactly what I'm going to promise, right? She didn't even say hi. She just went straight into it. She's like, since the moment I saw your shirt, before I even knew what you were going to talk about, I knew what I was going to do. I will win the NCAA Division III National Championship because I said I would. Said it with that type of tone, that type of pace, with that type of passion. For me, I hear these types of things all the time, okay? And sometimes I can be a little bit of a dream crusher in just a slight way when it comes to promises. I tell her, I say, you know what? I'm sorry, but that's not a promise. That's a goal. You can't really make that as a promise. Remember that definition I said? A statement telling someone you'll definitely do something or something will certainly happen in the future. Merriam-Webster Dictionary. When we think about that definition and consider our honor as a human being, we cannot promise things that we can't deliver. We must consider deeply external circumstances that in fact impact our promises that we make, right? I don't think that's something we can promise, because what if your best player rolls an ankle? What if you have a referee who has just a blown call that's just completely unfair? Or maybe your team just quite frankly isn't good enough that year. Are you willing to risk your honor on all these external circumstances that you have no control over? Are you willing to make these types of promises all the time and consistently be affected by those circumstances? I don't think you should, but that doesn't mean winning the national championship isn't an admirable and worthwhile goal. It's not to say that this isn't something you should keep in your life as a goal, but just not as a promise. The promise is to take to your best ability to memorize that playbook, to study. The promise is to study it every day so that you know it in and out to the best of your ability, to show up on time, to practice every day. That is within your control. To have sportsmanlike conduct so that you don't have a penalty because you blow a fuse and mouth off, or have some sort of thing that prevents you from winning because of a penalty that was within your self-control. These are the promises that we make and keep each and every day that lead us to that goal that we so passionately want. So what I'm asking you is to never write a goal on a promise card. You write promises. You write those tangible small steps that are within your control that lead you to that bigger goal. And it's those everyday commitments that I consider in my own work. So let's say you are perfect with your memory and your word choice is excellent, crafted, each syllable is with intention. Unfortunately, still challenges lie ahead of us. And that is simple. Motivation loss. We aren't robots. And with even the help of things like our phones to help us remember things, and a number of other things that can help with word choice, planning, still motivation loss is probably the biggest thing that prevents us from keeping our promises. I often wonder, with the promise card, over 3.5 million distributed to over 153 countries around the world and by request only, have I created more broken promises than promises kept? Has the encouragement of, because I said I would, to make promises, has it actually manifested more broken promises than promises fulfilled? Now, I think we have bettered this world, but this is a question to ask, because I know you guys did a promise wall at our event together. Okay, I was there and I was reading a lot of the promises, and again, not to be too judgmental, but automatically off the bat, I saw that some of the word choice was off. And I thought that, maybe it could be a little bit more tangible, but I'm asking you right now to deeply reflect on what you wrote. Are you sticking with that? Is motivation loss affecting you? Don't feel bad about that. That's human nature, okay? Not that we don't fight human nature. We do. We try to build ourselves to the best person we can be, as I have motivation loss each and every day. But how do we combat this? What can we do? Well, I want to give something, an idea that helps me. And in my life, I try to problem solve with analogies. I used to be an innovation manager for Fortune 100 top companies to work for in the United States. I very deeply worked on the thought of innovation and in this concept of new problem solving, as motivation loss was a problem for me. I try to look at different places in life and try to take concepts, philosophies that would help me. And there's an old quote from Pablo Picasso: "Good artists borrow, great artists steal." Okay? And the thought is that we can take solutions in different areas of life and apply them in another area, and it'll work. So I'm going to give you a weird scenario, and you're going to stick with me on this, that helped me understand how maybe I could get better with this motivation loss problem. It's called the two people theory. Two people theory. Now I put asterisks in the corner here because it's not a real like academic theory. This is some stuff I just made up on an airplane while I was going somewhere, and it just popped into my mind. But you know, I give TED Talks and stuff, and I got to try to sound smart. So we'll call it two people theory. But you know what? I'm gonna actually call it two people theorem. Yeah, I'm gonna make it even more. See, I don't even know what that word really means, but it's just a concept that I have. Maybe it'll resonate with you. Let's find out. It comes from a weird place. This thought that life, we feel so passionate at one moment, we have all this energy, and then like 5 days later, we're sitting on the couch playing Xbox One. It's weird because if you took yourself, you took myself, anybody, and you were to step outside and just look at these two individuals, it's almost like they're two entirely different people. This person at a Tony Robbins event who's just like, oh my God, they're standing up, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're going to do it, right? Yeah. Look at it a week later, right? Is every single person just like that? Not necessarily. It's like they're two people. And this is how I am. This is how everybody is. And so how can we combat this thought that our motion pitches so strongly? What can keep us towards the middle where we think of emotion as up and down? This is true, up and down. But a promise isn't like this. A promise is constant. A promise knows no change, or at least it should not. So let me go through a scenario, all right? Let's go through the analogy. And here it is. So in this fictitious scenario, right now, at this very moment, through the vents in the room you sit in right now, a gas, odorless, colorless, is being piped into the room. Of course, fictitious. But in this scenario, the gas has an agent, a virus in it, that with this breath that you just took, now in your body is a virus that in 24 hours, you will become a zombie. 24 hours from now, you will become a zombie. Just like you imagine in The Walking Dead, all these movies and shows, insatiable blood, attacking strangers, knowing no compassion. 24 hours, that is going to be you. What would you do? Think about that for a second. But in this scenario, you'll be a zombie for only 24 hours, and then you will return back to normal. Absolutely no consequence, no long-term side effects. And so the scenario is this: 24 hours from now, you become a zombie. You'll be a zombie for 24 hours, then you return to normal. What would you do? And for a second, I'm not asking this necessarily rhetorically. I'm asking you to really think in your mind for just a few seconds. Go through the scenario, and not as a joke. Like, think about it as if it was real. What is the next thing you would do? Well, I asked a lot of people this question just for fun. Sometimes when airplanes flying around the world or whatever, or just strangers, my friends, family, and there's a consistency in it. Again, it's not some kind of clinical test, but I think maybe the same thoughts might be going through your mind. And when we look at what we would do, a lot of people say, well, if I'm at home or actually anywhere, I'm going home. I got to go home and I got to tell everybody that I love to leave, to get out of here, right? A lot of people say that they want to protect their families, the people around them. In fact, they want to even protect themselves. So what they do is they go home, they tell everyone, don't come home, not 1 day, 3 days. You cannot be here. They say, go to their basement, a cellar, their room, and they would lock themselves up. In fact, chain their own arms and hands so that they couldn't harm themselves or passerby, strangers, and bear through the 24 hours where they become a different human being. You know, a lot of people say this. What you're doing here is you're forecasting your own weakness. You realize that quite literally, in some ways, you're going to become a different human being, and you are taking actions to prevent yourself from hurting others and hurting yourself, right? Why wouldn't we do this in real life? We know we're going to become these two different people, right? We know that's going to happen. It's just human nature. Can't fight it. But why wouldn't we create controls in our life that help us chain us to what is right, to being the good person? Well, it's kind of loose at this moment, right? I'll just give you an example of physically chaining yourself, and that's not going to happen. What could we do? All right, I'm going to give a couple examples, but in some ways you will have to find your own chains in this life on what's most important to you. Now, when I think of chains, we have to consider this as a metaphor for something in your life that no matter what, in your very weakest moment, you will defend and honor, right? No matter what. So let's talk about what some of those things might be. For me, social media has played a big part of keeping my promises. I used to post promise cards all the time, and our supporters, like the image you see now, they will do this. Why is that? Well, you know, telling yourself or telling one friend, that's one thing. Some of us have too much pride to let down all of our friends and family members that we legitimately told the world we were going to do something. We have too much respect for our ego. Well, why don't we leverage that? You know, people in the Tony Robbins camp, the Because I Said I Would camp, we ask you to write down your promises. I'm telling you to take it another step, to post it to social media, to know that just telling one person might not be enough when you need to increase the stakes. You need to create those chains. And some people, no matter what, they just can't embarrass themselves in front of everybody. And so they'll plow through that promise because they created that chain. And even in their weakest moment, they won't let everybody down like that. Maybe that's one way. For me, you know, I have pride about things that I really shouldn't in some ways. And I'll just kind of defend things really adamantly. And for me, some of it's sports, right? I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, okay? Very proudly so. And you probably remember from the walk, I walked across my entire state, 240 miles in 10 days. I was born in this state, raised, educated. I love Ohio. And with that comes a love for my local club, the Cleveland Browns. They're really, really bad, but I have a pride for them. And our worst adversary, we hate the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I might make a promise to a friend to say, hey, I'm going to show up for you, pick you up at 9 a.m. And if I'm not there, I'm going to change my Facebook profile picture to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Or you know what? Give me your favorite Pittsburgh Steeler shirt, and I promise I'm going to wear it 3 days in a row. What I'm doing there is I'm increasing the stakes. I'm creating those chains, because even in my weakest moment, I'm not going to do that, okay? Like, that's just not going to happen. So it's almost like pairing promises together in a certain way. And what we need to do is realize that sometimes help us. You know, some people are like this way with money. You know, I know this is a weird thing to say, but sometimes they'll say, hey, you know what, if I don't keep this promise, I'll give you $100. You know, I work in philanthropy and as a nonprofit organization. You know, while I travel around the world and do a lot of cool things, I don't got that much money, okay? So $100 means something to me. And so when you increase the stakes like this, again, it's creating those artificial chains. And I give these examples to let your gears turn. You got to think about what that is for you. And when your honor is on the line, when someone doesn't believe you're going to make the promise, or you yourself believe you're going to become that other person, it is time to create this artificial chain and increase the stakes. And what you did here was make a very simple plan in the case, taking a half step back to the zombie scenario, right? What you're doing is you're creating a very simple plan. Okay, go home. Wait, no, I got to stop by the hardware store. I got to buy the chains. Okay, in my mind, as I'm driving home, prepare this little speech for my family, tell them they need to leave. Okay, lock myself in. It's a simple plan, and that's how you kept the promise of not harming other people in the zombie scenario. This is very important. It's important to really consider the aspects of what a good plan are. And in my mind, one of the biggest elements is time consciousness. This concept of really accurately perceiving time, which is very hard, okay? Now, in this life, many people in the United States and even across the world, they'll say something like the following when it comes to time. Say, even motivational speakers, right? Like me, and you've heard some. They'll say, you need to make time for what's important in life. You need to make time for what's important in life. I hate this phrase, time cannot be made. Time cannot be made. We need to be even careful with our word choice and how we think about time. Time can only be respected, reserved, honored, right? Calculated for. Time cannot be made. And so we should not pretend it can be made, and we shouldn't even say it like this. We should really think strongly about how we reserve and respect time. So this is a blurred out example of my calendar, but actually, you know what? I'm really on a schedule that says time should be marked in little chunks, right? Now, when we look at how I keep promises, again, trying to be this so-called leader because I said I would, trying to become someone that honestly I don't know if I was born to be, I have learned that managing a calendar is my number one recommendation for you as a human being to get good with your promises. If you want to be good with your commitments, you almost have to be neurotic about marking and reserving your time. For me, let's say I'm going somewhere. I will literally mark down the time it takes to drive there, okay? I will literally mark down time to be lost because I'm going somewhere new, right? And it's an arena I have to speak in or some crazy thing, and I've never been there before, and there's like 95 places to park and 35 doors I could walk in. It could take me 15, 20 minutes just to navigate that. So I put that in my calendar because I promised I would be there at 9 o'clock, and that is a commitment to me. So I calculate not just the promise of giving a speech, but all the steps to wake up, to get ready, to drive there, or even walk there, to get lost, to do my AV check, to give the speech, to do meet and greet, to do Q&A, to drive back to the hotel, to get on my next conference call. It's all of those steps are detailed in the calendar that you see in front of you. And I think this is what helps you plan. Because let's say on a Thursday, someone says, hey, tomorrow, can you get me this thing? It would mean a lot to me, Alex. A lot to me if you could just 30 minutes, it's all it would take, write this out, email it to me. You could do that, right? And that's what people do to you, right? They're not meaning to be coercive. That's not what I'm saying. But they really care about this thing, and they ask you in this way. And so sometimes we don't have the courage to say no, right? But in order to get to that place where we truly understand how much time we have, you have to take this kind of step. You have to look at your calendar. And for me, I don't care if it's the president of the United States, right? Like, they could ask me to do something, and at a certain point, it's like, listen, I made other commitments to people, promises that I'm unwilling to break. At some point, I look at my calendar, I say, you know what? I'm sorry, man. I can't be there. I can't do it. I just have too much going on, and I respect you too much to just make this conversation easy, to just say yes and blow past it and just break your promises. Because when you do that, when you just try to people please by saying yes, 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 and then really not having that time, you're not doing a favor to anybody. That's why keeping a calendar is also important. So looking at my life, this number is somewhat outdated, but I probably give 160 speeches a year. 100,000, probably it's more like 200,000 attendees, 100 cities or whatever. And again, I've never been late to a single speech. I don't care if it's in Spain, Philippines, wherever. I'm getting there on time because I plan out those external circumstances, right? I never book the last plane out. I always have a backup plane because I made a promise that I would be there. And that refundable ticket helps me ensure that I am accounting for these external circumstances that could tear down my promise, right? And now I give the example of travel because it's one that's easy to understand, but in your life, you need to think about these backup plans, right? I used to be a volunteer in community or emergency response team, right? Like tornadoes and things like that. I trained to be a volunteer to help like my local community and things like that. I bring that up because if you talk to a firefighter, policeman, a soldier, people who work in, even nurses and doctors, people who work in life or death situations when it comes to their commitments to humanity, they'll tell you something called 2 is 1 and 1 is none, okay? 2 is 1 and 1 is none. For someone who is relying on a flashlight to save their lives, I assure you they have 2 flashlights, because 2 flashlights is actually only 1 because one of them is probably going to break. And if you only have 1 flashlight, well, you should consider yourself having none because you have to have those backup plans. That's what it takes to keep promises at the master level, to really be true to your word. Your promises, even when they are of self-control, will still have some external circumstances touching them. And you need to control that by having these backup plans. That's what I do with speaking engagements, and that's what I do with my promises. So what I'm saying is that don't make the time, mark the time. Mark the time in your calendar. When you make a promise to someone, pull out your phone, bring up your calendar app, and write it down. If you know the promise takes 2 hours, and you said you would do it by Friday and it's Wednesday, just mark on your calendar 2 hours on Thursday to do it. And then account for those external circumstances. Really consider, things like traffic, things like, the mode of transportation, like the equipment that you need, internet connection, whatever it takes for you to fulfill your promise, account for those things and create backup plans. That is what's going to make you good with your promises. And so at the end of the day, 4 simple ways I'm going to recommend to you. 1, be careful with your word choice. 15,942 words, too many to remember, too many to forget. Be careful with what you're saying and write it down. Write it down doesn't always mean on a promise card. In fact, I, as the founder, because I said I would proudly say that I don't care if you ever write a promise card ever again. If you write it somewhere, anywhere, if you document it in your calendar, you send an email reminder to yourself or to somebody else, to me, that is writing it down. But writing it down is important. We can't remember it all, and we need to. 3, create those motivators, chains, artificial chains that increase the stakes, that even at your worst moment, you're going to fulfill the promise for the sake of that other thing. And it ties you to what is right in this life so that you don't become 2 people. That you do not this, but you keep constant in your promise and pursuit. And the last is to create a plan. Don't think of your promises as just one thing. It's a series of steps. And each one of those steps deserve some thought, even 30 minutes to break them out into half-hour chunks. Calendar each one of those steps. Make sure that you have the time to do it in sequence. Respect your calendar, because this is the single place that should contain all of your promises in life, in my opinion. So I really do appreciate your time today to talk about how to keep a promise. I'm going to share one story with you about a gentleman I know who is helping me around the world to help push forward the importance of the promise. His name is Colonel Parker Schenecker. And as you know, because I said I get a lot of messages from people around the world about their promises. I've even got some from you, and I apologize if I haven't been able to respond to them all, but I mentioned all these messages because I sometimes see a theme. I see some kind of constant theme, and it makes me think and consider. And I was starting to see this theme in Because I Said I Would, coming from an address that would say APO, okay? Now in the United States, APO means nothing. It's not the abbreviation for state. And in my mind, as I started seeing this country in the mailing address, APO, what is APO? I'm like Googling APO country and things, and I couldn't understand what it was. until someone told me that it was how the United States processes military mail from our armed forces overseas, right? Kept getting all of these requests from soldiers for promise cards, and I guess that makes sense. Because I myself, while I do not believe in violence, I don't think this is the answer to the world's problems, and I do not like war, what I can say is that people who are in the armed forces, no matter what country, understand the importance of a promise. They make commitments that are life and death, willing to sacrifice their lives for what they believe might be the betterment of humanity. And in that, I got this message from this guy named Colonel Parker Schenecker. Okay, Colonel Schenecker served in the U.S. Army for 27 years, 20 tours in the Middle East. He is someone who truly believes in the mission of his country. And while politics around the world cannot always be on the same page, I understand that, even with people in this audience, I think all can understand the type of commitment that he feels he has, and I believe he does. So I get a message from the colonel, like I do so many, and in these promises, I really think of this concept of the commitment they've made. In the United States, it's called the Oath of Enlistment. It's a promise that each soldier makes as they join the military to solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. And as this promise goes, it is quite a ceremonial moment, as it is such a serious promise. And I thought, oh, must be what the colonel is messaging me about. But it wasn't. You see, in 2011, in January, the colonel was serving overseas on a tour in Afghanistan, but on this particular day of January 28th, 2011, he is sitting at a desk in military intelligence in the country of Qatar. It is 10 p.m. at night. And he sees two gentlemen walking towards his desk. And they're in battle dress, they're in combat boots, dirt covering them. And if he thinks to himself as they walk across this room that it is just two people coming to speak about tomorrow's mission. Doesn't think about it, kind of keeps working until they walk over. But then he looks up again and he notices that one is the same ranked officer, a colonel in the U.S. Army. And that is quite a high-ranking officer. It goes like a ton of levels, colonel and then general. So this is different. He sees the other officer is a chaplain in the U.S. Air Force. Now, in the U.S. Army Code of Conduct, there is something called the Army Regulation 600-8-1, the Army Casualty Program. It is a personal protocol to tell someone in the armed forces as they serve their country that someone they love has passed away back at home. The colonel realizes what's about to happen, and he thinks to himself that perhaps it is his mother who has passed away. The colonel himself on this day is 48 years old, and he thinks to himself, this is a natural course of life. Mom had to go one day, and I guess that's today. He bears himself to hear this news before these gentlemen speak, but that is actually not what the colonel is told. Colonel Parker Schenecker is informed of something very different. For others, it would play out as a news story across the United States. You see, it's very hard to talk about this story. It is perhaps one of the most serious of them all when it comes to Because I Said I Would. Colonel Parker Schenecker had two children, Bo Schenecker, age 13, Calix, age 16. Their mother shot and killed them both while Colonel Schenecker was overseas serving his country. Julie Schenecker, his wife, would drive from their home and pick up Bowen from middle school. In the car ride home, she would shoot him in the head, park the car, go into the home, and shoot their only other child, Calix, while she was doing her homework. This is the news that the colonel received on that day. It is a very long ride home from the Middle East by yourself on this plane. It's almost hard to hold yourself together, right? Your wife, who had a mental illness, you could say, could call it evil, you could call it a lot of things, took the only two things in your life that you truly loved. At this point in life, there are many paths to go down. I don't know if you know this, but in the United States, suicide kills more armed services members than combat itself. The cost of war is high, and it comes into the minds of our young, not only here, but around the world. And that's why I hate war so much. But it's a path you can go down, suicide. The colonel decided that for him it would be different. That instead of this pit of depression, that he would make a promise in honor of the ones that he loved, in honor of Calix and Bo Schenecker. As the news kept playing the story over and over again, he decided that he would make a promise not to remember them how they died, but how they lived. By the promises that he made at the funeral, he would make a commitment himself that he would live in honor of how his children lived, to remember how they lived, to honor that. He started the Calix and Bo Schenecker Memorial Fund and would work to raise money to help children, high schoolers, middle schoolers, to advance through education to college, to pay for those scholarships and books and the things they needed to go to where his children would never be. College. He made a promise. He works at it each and every day in his own way. He actually laminated that card and he keeps it in his wallet as a constant reminder. To me, it is a distinct honor to know Colonel Schenecker myself. In fact, I wanted to actually respond to a question that I know Cammie, who has been a big supporter of ours, who has helped galvanize the very group I'm talking about now to continue to get them to think about because I said I would. Cammie had a question that actually ties to Colonel Schenecker himself. You see, because I said I would is starting chapters around the world. And Cammie had a question about that because she's in touch with our newsletter, and encourage you to go to our website at the bottom of it to sign up to get messages from us about advancements in the movement. Well, she got one of those newsletters and knew that we were starting chapters around the world. We're calling each chapter an echo, a regional, a local group of people that come together to make unified promises together to help their communities, people in need. But more than that, much like the group you're in, sometimes it is about learning, like we did hopefully today. We need to learn each month, not only help people, but advance ourselves personally in our understanding of this world in our minds. And we also hold each other accountable to individual promises. That's another thing this chapter program is going to do. And I'm proud to say that Colonel Schenecker has agreed to join our team as our chief echo leader. He is full-time staff. He retired from the Department of Defense only in November, joined us full-time, and he's going to help us find echo leaders around the world to help us push forward a worldwide movement that change the culture of humanity itself and hopefully change the course of human history for the betterment of man. And I just wanted to answer Cammie's question about what we're doing with chapters. Now, right now, chapters we have funding for 6 Echo locations. They are an adult-based program, so it is 18 and older. However, very soon we're going to start creating Echoes at a high school level based on school locations, so that we can enable the youth, the true future of our society and humanity. And I'm not saying that because, oh, this is a youth group and, I'm feeding you some line because that's what adults do. I honestly care too much about my word choice to make stuff up. I really genuinely believe that the youth, they are quite literally the future of the world. And for some generations, it is too late to change them, but it is not too late to change future through people like you. And so that's why I think starting chapters at a high school level is so important. That's why I believe and sincerely am investing our resources as a nonprofit organization into character education, into youth leadership. But the truth is, it will take me and mine, it'll take us time, the Colonel and I, to build these programs. Things don't happen overnight. And so what I would ask you is to take this movement, because I said I would, our stories, what we have done, to galvanize your own friends in your own cities across the world to make and keep promises together. Don't wait for me. Don't wait for somebody to create something. When I started Because I Said I Would, looked around the world and tried to find something that resonated with the importance of a promise, could not find it, so I built it myself, and that's what I'm asking you to do. Talk to 5 of your friends, all write a unified promise, keep it together, share it with us. Share it with Because I Said I Would. I'll give you, in fact, something I don't like to do very often, especially with a group this large, but I hope that you will honor what I'm trying to do and respect it. I'll give you my personal email address. Okay, now this is not like, oh, it's a personal, no, this is like literally the email address, the only email address I have. It is alex@becauseIsaidIwould.com. If you make and keep those unified promises, or even a commitment yourself, I would love to see the stories personally. It's hard for me to respond to all the emails, so I cannot commit to you that, but I would love to at least have the opportunity to see what you do with this message and how you make and keep your own promises. So I don't know exactly how we are on time, but I think I would love to take questions and answer anything that you have about, all the crap that I just blabbered on about.
That was amazing, Alex. That was incredible. And I think we went a solid hour, even though you had only booked half an hour, but that's awesome. Go with the flow. You're in the zone there. That was awesome. We have a bunch of shout outs from Kayla White, from Mayhul and Chuck, 2 of the team leaders. Remarkable, phenomenal speaker, hugely valuable session. And then Cami, whose question you answered very eloquently. I've been following Because I Said I Would for over 2 years. I love his message. Super great to spread. And then her question about the chapters. I actually have a question for you really quick, and I'm not sure how much time you have for questions, so I'll be very brief.
Well, it's my fault for going over. I need to be more time conscious, right? See? Perfect example.
It's awesome.
Yeah, but go ahead.
So in what we learn at GYLP and what a lot of Tony talks about is reasons why. Reasons come first, and then how comes second.
Yes.
You have your goal or your outcome, but it's not the goal that gives you the motivation to do it. It's the reason why. Mm-hmm. And I love how Because I Said I Would it implies a reason why. The reason why is because you said you would. It's your word. It's your integrity. It's your honor. So I'm wondering why you chose that specific reason as the why for your promises. Why is your word such a powerful reason why?
This is an excellent question, and I have a couple of different answers for it. The word choice of Because I Said I Would was not accidental. So imagine yourself in my shoes 3 years ago, okay? Age 27, my father passes away of stage 4 small cell lung cancer. And, I've been to funerals before, not many, but I know how they go, okay? Everybody is admittedly and sincerely sad, depressed even about the loss of the one they love, and they mourn them through speech. But the truth is, they go home, 5 days later, nothing's different. And I was Afraid is the word I would use. Afraid that this is going to happen to my own father, the person I love the most who passed away, that this is all it was going to be. And I knew if I called it the Al Sheen Foundation, I wouldn't be on this phone call with you right now, okay? Because we need to have a strong why. I believe that when you have a strong why, you can be strong. And so I titled it Because I Said I Would. I didn't talk about Al Sheen. I didn't talk about Alex Sheen. I made it about you because that's what the world needs. It needs all of us to take a certain pride in improving ourselves, our families, our communities, our cause. So that's the original word choice. But let me talk about a little bit more about how you can apply this to your own life and not just a set of 5 words. Philosophically, why is Because I Said I Would relevant beyond what I just spoke to. Well, we talked about this 2-person theory, right? Becoming 2 people and etc. Well, if we look at this thought of our why as one of our motivators, the truth is we should have a strong why, like being there for your family, helping others in need. But let us not be naive. The why, its strength can go up and down, okay? When you say it the first time, and the why can be strong then, but over time it can go down, okay? The reason why Because I Said I Would to me is powerful is because it is a second why. It is a alternate, a supportive why that is constant. Because the truth is, me being on this call, I made a promise to you, to everyone on this call, that I would be here today, okay? And I have that why, because I believe in youth leadership, because I believe that the people on this call are in a position where they can make a change. I believe that. That's my why. But you know what? I had to wake up a little early today, okay? I had a friend flying from Washington, D.C. who's sitting in the other room just hanging out. My best friend since I was a kid. I don't get to see him, right? And so this why is like, do I really want to get on that call? Do I really, is that really that important, right? But the truth is I have a supplemental why, and that is Because I Said I Would, okay? I believe deeply in a sense of honor and that I will not tarnish my name, even if this why was weak, which in this case it wasn't, but I'm just trying to give an example. I have this other thing that even if this why becomes weak, this other reason falls into its place. That I don't care if what the promise is. That backup reason is that I'm a person of my word, and that's just how it is. Okay, so that's what I would ask the people on this call to consider. That if you have your one why, the original thing that ties to the promise, but you need some kind of backup. Maybe that's your family, maybe that's your own honor. Could be something. Could be again that thing that you make up, that chain that you make up. We need more than just one reason, it turns out. So that's my thought on why Because I Said I Would is important.
That's an amazing answer. That's incredible. To be respectful of your time, we're only going to have one more question, and it's from another team leader. We have 3 team leaders on this call who've been commenting, who all have families with young kids, and who have made the time to be on this call and be on the full hour. And I would argue it's because they said they were going to be on here. Mehul's been on the last couple. Nate's been on all of them. Chuck and Nate actually ran the last one. So amazing. Shout out to you guys for being on here. Nate's question, and to wrap it up with this one, thank you, Alex. What is your recommended recovery path for someone who breaks an important promise? We don't set out to break promises, but sometimes it happens. What should we do to get back on the right track?
Yeah. One of the things that I'm working on currently is the philosophy of Because I Said I Would as a movement. It has 5 pillars. We haven't released it yet, but I'll talk about one that I think will tie into this and this concept of broken promises, which is incredibly important. In one of the phrasings and the words of our pillars of philosophy, it's before we hold others accountable, we hold ourselves accountable. Okay, and I mentioned that first to just give it some context. In this life, it's kind of easy to get upset, right? And one thing I don't mention a lot, just because it doesn't fit into a speech necessarily, but I'm not necessarily ashamed to say, is that my dad was not a perfect man, right? I describe him as average in many speeches. And I mentioned this thought about holding others accountable. Before you hold others accountable, you hold yourself accountable. I mentioned my dad because he was like the angry dad, right? You guys either had an angry dad or probably more likely had a friend who maybe had that angry dad or something like that, right? Well, that was my dad. And I've always wondered for his whole life why he had to be that mad. And that was one of the reasons, was because he kept his promises and other people didn't. And with that comes a tremendous amount of disappointment, right? So that made him upset. And I say that because if we do not forgive others for breaking promises, if we do not remember that we ourselves have broken promises and that we are fallible as human beings, then we will spend our lives pretty upset, because broken promises are a reality of this life. And in the path of repairing a broken promise, there's a few things that I would say to do. The first is to apologize authentically, okay? Now, we have come into a habit, at least in the United States, to offer a bunch of excuses, to have this tone that suggests that, well, you know, things happen. No. Bury that tone. Abandon it. When you say sorry to someone, look them in the eyes, quite literally, and say, listen, I made a promise to you. Say that. Recognize that a commitment was made. Don't just say, I'm sorry I didn't do this. Say, I made a promise to you, and I am sorry that I did not fulfill it. That's on me. That's my fault. You don't deserve that. And just stop. Yes, it could have been because of traffic that you couldn't control, but the truth is you could have planned for that, and just leave it all behind. Authentically apologize to the person, right? It's hard to do, and it takes some practice. But when you do that, you'd be surprised at how much someone will come to that understanding that you are a human and that you just made a mistake, right? That's step one. Step two is to recommit at some level. And this could be a number of things, right? It's a lot of times if someone's knee-jerk reaction is to just say a bigger promise to make up for it in some way, right? Like, oh, I promised at this level. You know what? I'm going to do even more to make up for it. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's not the greatest thing to do. Sometimes you need to earn that person's trust back by just doing anything. And sometimes you have to admit in your life that you only have so much time, and you need to actually reduce the scope of what you're committing to. Again, hard to do because the person is going to expect for you to make up for it, but you cannot make up for it by making a bigger promise that you're just going to break again. So I would say the next time around, be a little bit more tangible, be a little bit more specific, right? Again, mark it in your calendar. Even I sometimes say, look, I put it in my calendar. Last time I forgot, this time I put it in my calendar. I'm sorry, you know? So that's an option. Or the third option is to simply say, I can no longer commit to this. Now, you might get an earful, okay? And you got to, at some point in life, have to face the fire. If you really can't do it, you can't do it. So it's just different levels of commitment depending on what you feel is right. But it might require some more planning. But no matter what you do, it requires the authentic apology.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal answer for that too. So I think we're good for questions. So if you want to give your closing thoughts, and I'm going to end the call. Don't hang up just after.
Sure. Okay.
So
one, I want to apologize, and I need to do that. I went over. I should have had my timer up, and it's on me. So if I've wasted your time today, I want to say sorry, because I said it would be 30 minutes, and it clearly wasn't. The second thing I want to say is that if you do have a promise in your life, or a group promise you want to make with other friends, students, teammates, please share them through our website or email them directly to me. I'd love to see your promises around the world, and I'd be floored and honored to see that. The third is that I often speak at schools. I often speak at the high schools, middle schools around the country, and hopefully around the world. Youth leadership is important to me. It's not where all the money is for our charitable efforts. It's not where a lot of stuff is, but it's where the future is. And so if you'd like me to come speak at your school, please go to becauseIsaidIwould.com/Alec Sheen, and throw your name in the hat there, and let's see if it's something's possible, because I'd love to continue my support for this group and your efforts locally around the world. And even if it's a Skype call, maybe it's possible. I am pretty booked, but I'd like to throw that out there. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Check out our website for all those links. And at the end of the day, if you don't do any of that, if you just keep your promises, that would be enough for me. So thank you. I'll stay on the line, but have a great day.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. That was phenomenal. Unbelievable session. I don't think you wasted anyone's time. You just added double the value that you promised. You, instead of over promising and under delivering, you under promised and then more than double over delivered. So that was phenomenal. The next momentum session is going to be next month. So check back on the Facebook group for that, and we'll see you guys next time.